Einstein.
It looks just like I'd hoped an Einstein-inspired fridge would.
And the amazing story of a boy in Malawi who's made household chores easier by bringing electricity to his entire village.
I was very happy and very excited, like, wow, I've done it.
But first, let's meet some mechanical marvels that take the hassle out of housework. And we're talking about domestic robots. Over to you, Ashley, my dear.
Thank you, Wallace. It's every inventor's dream to build a robot that can do anything a human can. Well, up to a point. And one of the first people to construct a robot that behaved like a human was British inventor Tony Sale. Back in 1949, Tony was an officer in the RAF.
Proudly we present George of the RAF Saffron Walden, brainchild of Pilot Officer Sale.
It was the beginning of the Cold War, and while lots of scientists were busy with the nuclear arms race, Tony was busy trying to make his robot's legs race. Well, walk a bit anyway.
The challenge was to build a walking robot, and that hadn't been done previously, and I thought I could do it. And so I set to and got some motors for his feet and a radio control system, and there it was. I had a walking George robot. It was important that George looked human, and so it was this which gave people the rapport with him as a human-like thing, and they hadn't seen that before.
It could change its shape to suit every flying condition. Massive triple-slotted flaps, unwound to give 90% extra lift at slow speeds. The wing did all this, yet could be bent at the tip 20 feet before braking. But the dangerous flutter threatened the entire project. Jack Waddell deliberately pushed the aircraft into the danger zone.
To explore the flutter area, which came normally with a certain airspeed and altitude, you would approach it very cautiously by only advancing your speed a little bit at a time.
Mach 0.8.
The flutter started.
You knew you were in dangerous territory. It's a very dangerous phenomena and has to be carefully controlled.
Okay, decreasing speed.
But normally that meant right away you backed off. You pulled the throttles back and you slowed down. As soon as you slowed down, then you left the danger area with some more information.
After a month of hard flying, they worked out a fix.
Using wood from gum trees, William built a 5-metre-high tower and attached his PVC blades to the top. Finally, William used a dynamo connected to the rim of an old bike wheel, which he hoped would convert the windmill's movement into electrical power.
When I was doing that, lots of people were laughing at me. I was afraid that if this thing is not gonna work, they will say that you are a little crazy. So I was like just crossing my finger that let this thing work. So I put it up, and slow but surely it started spinning.
But would his makeshift creation actually produce electricity? That night, he put it to the test. He wired his windmill to a small light bulb, climbed the tower, and waited for the wind to blow.
At first, a little bit of light just come on, and I was like, oh, now the light is coming. And suddenly, a strong wind starts blowing, and then the blades start turning a little fast, speeding, and then the light bulb was just like bright, and I was like, wow, I was very happy and very excited, like, wow, I've done it.
The fridge, an amazing household invention that most of us take totally for granted. It was in 1927 when the first domestic fridge was introduced, the General Electric monitor top. But by the mid-1930s, fridges in the home were starting to become widespread. They were the housewife's dream. And from then on, the daily shopping trips for perishable food became a thing of the past. But early fridges tended to use pretty nasty chemicals, and these occasionally leaked. Could this design have been the answer? It was the brainchild of one of the greatest minds ever, Albert Einstein. And this is it, Einstein's fridge. How do you fancy one of these in your kitchen? That is the strangest looking fridge I have ever seen. It looks just like I'd hoped an Einstein-inspired fridge would. Delightfully complicated and reliant on relative gravitational potential.
It's part of my house. It's part of me.
Trevor has dedicated his life to bringing us inventions that help us around the home. And it was in this very room in 1989 that Trevor first came up with his now famous idea of the wind-up radio.
I was watching a program one day about the spread of HIV/AIDS in Africa. Now, this was the most ghastly thing you could imagine. They said the only way they could possibly bring the information out to people was by radio. But there was a problem. Most of Africa didn't have electricity, and the only other form of electricity was in the form of batteries, which were horrendously expensive. So I had this idea, surely there's enough power in a spring to drive a dynamo, should drive a radio. But I had to prove to myself that it would work. And I had a small DC motor, which I knew, when run in reverse, becomes a dynamo. And I literally put that into the chuck of this, like that. And I joined these two wires here to the back of this cheap transistor radio. And then, when I held the motor and turned the handle, I got the first spark of sound from the radio. And that was done within 20 minutes of seeing.
It's old.
I should be able to combine these ingredients with a field in Kentucky and make a mobile phone.
But first, why don't we take a look at an amazing invisibility cloak? Why don't we? Because it's invisible, of course. Over to you, Ashley, my dear.
Why, thank you. Now, watch carefully, Wallace. You might think invisibility is just a bit of TV trickery or movie special effects magic. But a top British scientist may be able to fix it for real.
How about that?
Making things invisible depends on fooling our sight, a sense most of us place complete faith in. After all, seeing is believing, isn't it?
There are two types of invisibility. The first one is camouflage, where you actually colour yourself to blend in with your background. But then there's what I'd call real invisibility, where you actually take light waves and bend them round an object. So someone behind me will see the light coming from over there, but they won't see me, so I'll effectively be invisible.
Radar was originally used to spot enemy aircraft well before they came in sight. And these days it's also used for air traffic control and to track shipping. But Sir John's invisibility cloak might make radar's military use redundant.
The central region here is hidden from view, so you can put anything in here that you want to hide. If I were an alien, a Martian with radar wave vision, then an object in the middle will be completely invisible. And also the cloak itself will be invisible. So it will be as if this was thin air.
This unique footage from one of the cloak's early tests shows the yellow and blue radar waves bending around the cloak before returning to their original path. Since the waves aren't changed or bounced away, the radar can't detect the circular object in the centre. It's effectively invisible. The device is still in the experimental stage, but the military are unsurprisingly very excited about the possibility of making aircraft invisible to radar. Meanwhile, Sir John is looking to the future.
We have this technology to hide things from radar waves, but if we're talking about an optical cloak, that is more difficult, and it will certainly take at least 10 years to do that, but I believe it's possible if we devote enough resources to it.
I don't remember really what happened, except waking up in hospital, obviously in pain, distressed, and with my arm missing.
Modern prosthetic arms typically use sensitive electronics to turn nerve impulses in the amputee's remaining limb into movements in the new arm. And you might have thought they'd be ideal for Mark. Unfortunately, that's not the case. Because his amputation was so close to his shoulder, most of these sophisticated prosthetics wouldn't fit him. Even when he found one that did, the arm wasn't strong enough to cope with his job as an engineer.
The electric limb broke down all the time, maybe because of my occupation. It simply was too fragile. It became apparent to me that I had to get the very robust limb, and no one even had one.
Some people would have given up and settled for a simple cosmetic arm. But not Mark. If there was no suitable prosthetic available, then he'd invent his own.
I used to muck about with Meccano sets and pulling apart clocks and umbrellas and all sorts of things as a child. I'm just a fiddler, I can't help myself.
Researching prosthetics on the internet, one particular design caught his eye. The Carnes arm, from 1902. He lost his sight while serving in Iraq and now relies on his guide dog Hugo to help him find his way around.
He's great, he's a great companion, and he helps me out massively in getting about for me to be.
But when it comes to things like looking in the fridge and picking out a cheese, Hugo has his limitations. Well, not all dogs are like Gromit, you know. That's where these experimental glasses come in. A small video camera mounted on the glasses sends a signal to the lollipop that Craig puts in his mouth. The lollipop creates tingling sensations on his tongue in a pattern that represents what the camera is seeing. With some practice, Craig is learning to recognise that pattern as an image.
It's like champagne bubbles or popping candy on your tongue. That's what it sort of feels like. And it's just sort of drawing an image out on your tongue, and you can just feel it. It's like drawing on someone's back when you were a kid. You draw like the image of a house, just the lines on a back, and you'd be able to go, oh, it's a house, or it's a car, or it's a letter A. It's a bit like that on your tongue, but the image is more imprinted, so it's like a constant stream, a constant image on your tongue.
Beep.
Ah, I've always wondered what that button was for, Wallace. Now, the ejector seat is standard issue in all modern military aircraft, if not TV studios. But it's the one invention you never want to have to use because it really is the last resort, as one lucky ejectee remembers only too well.
Flying around about 27,500 feet and 500 or odd miles an hour when things started to go wrong. The control column drove itself hard over to the left, and I couldn't move it. The steering locked up. There was no real thought process in it. At that point, I knew I had to eject. It's like the biggest bang, the biggest kick up the bottom that you could imagine as the explosion rockets you clear of the airplane. But thankfully, I'm here to tell you the story today.
The ejector seat is truly a life-saving invention. It was invented in the 1940s because aircraft started flying so fast, it was no longer possible for a pilot to simply throw himself out of a stricken plane. But it might surprise you to know that this is not a new idea. This picture, dating from the First World War, apparently shows a German surveillance pigeon equipped with a camera for photographing Allied targets. But can it be true? Did the Germans really use homing pigeons to spy behind enemy lines? Or was this just an elaborate propaganda hoax? Well, it turns out that pigeons have been used in times of war. And believe it or not, the humble pigeon has a pretty distinguished record. In both World Wars, troops made use of the pigeon's homing capability to carry important messages back from the front.
Mrs. Alexander, wife of the First Lord of the Admiralty, hears the exploits of Gustav and Paddy, two D-Day carrier pigeons decorated with the Dickon Medal for gallantry.
During the Second World War, 32 pigeons were awarded the Dickon Medal, the animal equivalent of the Victoria Cross, and were even given a peck on the cheek.
Well, well, what do you know?
How appropriate. Pigeon post is one thing, but could these birds really be used to photograph enemy positions?
Hetty's hopes for making her name as an inventor were dashed.
Hollywood's most famous movie stars leave the film.
Disappointed, she went back to the day job of being one of the most glamorous women in the world. She helped raise over $7 million to help the war effort.
50 screen celebrities giving their time and talents to aid the national war effort.
Hetty and George's invention was never used in World War II. But that's not the end of the story. This is a typical modern mobile phone mast, and masts like this relay all those important phone signals to ensure messages like, "I'm on the train," get through clearly. Crucially, each call constantly switches between different channels to keep our conversations private. Sound familiar? It's a modern version of frequency hopping. The version that makes this work is called spread spectrum technology, but it's a direct descendant of Hetty's idea. The US Navy might not have taken her seriously, but the modern telecommunications industry and anyone who uses a mobile phone owes Hedy Lamarr a big thank you.
I'll be there at 5. And then everything was quiet. It was a miracle. It could have been possibly the worst crash, but in my mind, the 747 saved our lives.
Incredibly, Amelia's 747 was repaired and went back into service.
My love affair continued, and I did enjoy flying her from time to time. Then all of a sudden, she disappeared.
Amelia learnt of the fate of her jumbo, now 40 years old, and renamed after Pan Am's founder, 1T Trip.
She ended up apparently in South Korea as some kind of restaurant. How demeaning. Then I heard they finally dismantled her and she doesn't exist anymore. Why couldn't they have kept an airplane like her, you know, for all posterity?
Thankfully, the Black Cat was never actually nuked, and its owners, perhaps unsurprisingly, remember Pedrick well.
I think he was a typical professor type in that he wasn't at all worldly. He didn't live in the world that we live in. He lived in the world of ideas in his own mind, didn't he?
Yes. Arthur would come in with the odd patent and say, this one should make us all famous, and tell us that he was being serious.
Not all of Pedrick's ideas were accidents waiting to happen. He patented schemes for irrigating areas of desert, building wind turbines, and generating energy from waste. Ideas that might have seemed outlandish 40 years ago, but are now commonplace. So if Pedrick was sensible enough to patent such clever and far-sighted ideas, why did he bother with the ridiculous ones?
I think he thought some funny patents would attract attention and publicity, perhaps, and draw people into the more serious.
See what I did there, Ashley?
Aha! Very good, Wallace. Now, we all know that the submarine is designed for going underwater. But of course, it's also perfect at being undetectable. So if you fancy doing a bit of travelling around while keeping a very low profile, it's the perfect invention. And that's how this amazing submarine came about. Mikhail Pushkov from St. Petersburg started building his one-man pedal-powered sub in his attic 30 years ago. He was just 20 years old.
This sub is my life's work, and I would say it's the love of my life as well. I'm very proud of my submarine.
Mikhail built his submarine from old scrap and stuff he found lying around.
I made all the parts and put all the different sections together. I managed to find the pedals, seat, window, propeller, steering wheels. I collected them together and had to attach them to the main body, and do it all so that no one would notice.
No one would notice? Why all the secrecy? Well, remember when Mikhail started building his submarine, it was the Soviet era, and the head of state was the hardline Leonid Brezhnev. Personal freedom wasn't at the top of his political agenda, or even at the bottom of it.
In the days of the Soviet Union, it was difficult to go abroad. I couldn't just leave my job and go traveling in my own country.
Easy. And let's face it, even walking was difficult. Transport in this country needed something revolutionary, some real blue sky thinking. A challenge that British rail engineer Charles Osmond Frederick took quite literally. His answer to the problem was a flying saucer. And not just any old flying saucer, but one powered by a laser beam. In 1973, care of British Rail, Charles patented his design.
I became interested in what sort of system you could use that would do the things that flying saucers were reported as doing. So I sketched something out, and we've got the device here that you use to get the thing going. So one way of doing that is to have a disc which you spin at very high frequency using laser beams. That was the basic idea of how you were getting some thrust.
Sadly, for the long-suffering British rail commuters, the 444 flying saucer to crew never arrived.
We had quite a bit of trouble finding someone to retail that, but then once people got used to the idea, it created great excitement.
Next, Sir Clive introduced us to his digital watch, and this changed the way we thought about time forever. No more gently rotating hands on a nice round watch face. Now we have the sharp precision of the futuristic digit. But it was the legendary range of affordable Sinclair personal computers that really made Sir Clive a household name.
They're selling so well, they're selling like hotcakes, that we're having to control the crowds.
Everything was done from scratch. The operating system, the architecture of the machine, keyboard, everything was done from scratch. It was for quite a while the best-selling computer in the world.
On the back of his amazing success with his computers, Sir Clive decided to take a huge leap into the unknown. His restless mind was already looking to the future when he introduced the Sinclair C5.
Today's press launch of the C5 at Alexandra Palace had all the razzmatazz of a three-ring circus.
And leading this test is Chief Engineer Joe Krajewski.
The fate of this mission is central to everybody's soul, really. Most folks have worked on this for 3 years, 5 years, 8 years. You don't get to do many in a given career. You only get to do a few if you're lucky. And so the stakes for everybody are as high as they can be.
This is just a rehearsal, but on the 6th of August, they'll be doing it for real, hoping the Curiosity rover will arrive safely at its destination. Mars, the red planet. It's become known as the Bermuda Triangle of space. Since the launch of the first rocket there in the 1960s, 2/3 of all missions have ended in disaster. The mission logs make scary reading. Failed to launch. Missed the planet. Lost radio contact. Lost on arrival. The team knows Curiosity might never reach the surface of Mars. And the craft is constantly being dragged from its course by the gravitational pull of other planets. Just a tiny error could result in Curiosity missing Mars altogether.
To get the distance scales approximately similar, where the quarterback here is throwing a pass 30 meters, 40 meters away. Brian's target of Mars is hundreds of millions of kilometers away. So it's similar to as if this quarterback here were throwing a football to a receiver in, say, London and needing to hit his mark.
It'd be the wrong kind of football.
Yeah.
In November 2011 at Kennedy Space Center, the rover made its way to the launch pad on top of an Atlas rocket. For the mission team, the launch is the moment of no return. While the craft is on the ground, final fixes can always be made. But once it's in the air, a fault could mean the end of the mission.
There's so much energy involved with launching. All the little piece parts on the spacecraft are designed to survive that vibration and those forces.
6 days from now, the team hope Curiosity will execute this unlikely maneuver. Back on Earth, they will be waiting for the message they have all dreamed of. It's safely down. The purpose behind all this daredevil engineering is to send the biggest payload of scientific equipment ever to leave Earth, to uncover the secrets of Mars. It's the latest step in mankind's love affair with this curious red light in the night sky. Ever since Galileo built his first telescope, astronomers, professional and amateur alike, have peered through their lenses at the red planet.
Oh, yes.
Do you see it?
I see it.
I see some bright colors. I see some bright colors. I think it's Mars. I think it's Mars. I think you might be right.
It's Mars, for goodness sake. You know, how could you not be interested?
So Curiosity will first have to use all the other tools it has at its disposal.
The very first tools are the very high-resolution cameras on the mast of Curiosity. And then when we get even closer to a sample that we might see in the distance and then approach, we'll start using other tools. For example, on the mast is an experiment called ChemCam. ChemCam will point at a rock and fire a laser, and then look at the emissions that come off from that rock. And that's really important because it can tell the differences between different types of rocks. And so if we come across a rock that looks substantially different than rocks we've looked at before, then we might want to approach those samples, put out the arm, and then start interrogating that rock or that outcrop with instruments that are on the arm. An element analyzer and a very nice microscope. And if we examine the outcrop or the rock with those tools and decide that it's worth even further exploration, then what we do is we sample the rock. We drill into the rock, we create some powder with the sampling system, and then we deliver that powder into SAM.
Anyone we see walk by, you can like boss them around. About this guy right here. You can boss him around?
Yeah, I can boss him around.
Okay, cool. Go on. We first geeked out for a bit over a bunch of examples of parts from previous space missions, and a hardware wall like this is just a great illustration of what makes JPL such a cool place to work. Actually, I designed this. This is my hardware from Grail with Andy. This was cool because you got these like flexures for like temperature variation. So this isn't just for show. This is like literally when you're trying to figure out a way to do things. These are examples of how it's been done before, right?
Right, and a lot of these are made by examples of this is the way you shouldn't do it.
Oh, so that's why my hardware.
That's why your hardware's up there, right?
And so after that, we headed down to check out the rover and meet up with my friend Emily. But before we could just go in and see it, we had to get suited up because the rover is looking for signs of biological life, and we don't want to contaminate our samples before before we even arrive. So a bunny suit and air shower can go a long way. Emily, by the way, was the vehicle assembly lead for the descent and cruise stages, which is a big responsibility. This is the rover.
The flight rover. It will be on Mars 12 months from now.
It's so complex when you come up and get this close. In fact, Perseverance is the most complex thing humans have ever built and sent to another planet. It's got laser, X-ray, and radar capabilities, plus 19 cameras, and a nuclear-powered battery system for energy. It's a big deal here at JPL. My buddy Matt here mentioned another way this is done.
We build two spacecraft, one that goes to Mars and one that we keep here on Earth to test. And this is an exact replica of Curiosity, who's driving around on Mars right now. And then we use this one to test driving around obstacles and driving over rocks.
And he knows a thing or two about driving over rocks because he was a rover driver for both Opportunity and Curiosity. This guy is like one of maybe 40 people in the world who has driven a vehicle on another planet, which is kind of a big deal. And so a few more cool things about Perseverance are that it has a mini helicopter drone stowed away on its underbelly named Ingenuity. This will be mankind's first powered flight on another planet, which sort of makes this a Wright brothers moment. And the rover and the drone will get great footage of each other, but we're mainly testing it out so that in the future we might use drones to scout out terrain for us or get samples from hard to reach locations, or you could have swarms of drones carrying materials for humans from one site to another. Perseverance is also testing out a new instrument called MOXIE that basically amounts to a mechanical tree because its function is to convert CO2 into oxygen, which future explorers will need to breathe and for rocket fuel.
The rover has been in this clean room for about a year and a half, starting as just a chassis, just the skeleton.
And then all the teams and engineers have been taking turns coming down and building up their part until it's done. In fact, I was in that exact position on Curiosity, designing my hardware for about 3.5 years, and when it was all tested and complete, integrating it on the rover right here in this room.
Sitting on the San Andreas Fault, there is an average of 10,000 earthquakes and aftershocks every year. The biggest for 100 years was the Loma Prieta earthquake of 1989. Its epicenter was here, just outside Santa Cruz, California. There is quite simply no mathematical model that can predict an earthquake like this one. But after the earthquake come the aftershocks, and that's a different matter.
So we're several hundred meters from the epicenter. Nearby was one of the aftershocks of the original Loma Prieta earthquake. After a large earthquake occurs, there's a probability that another earthquake will follow nearby in space and time.
George discovered seismologists had found a pattern to earthquake aftershocks and developed an algorithm to predict these aftershock clusters.
So these types of clustering patterns are also seen in crime data. So after a crime occurs, you will see an increased likelihood of future events nearby in space and time. You can think of them as aftershocks of crime.
Mars is really hard. Historically, only about half the attempts have been successful, but the willingness to take big risks to reap big rewards is the foundation on which NASA is built. The live stream to watch the landing starts on Thursday, February 18th at 11:15 a.m. Pacific. It will hit the top of the atmosphere an hour and a half later at 12:48 p.m., which starts the 7 minutes of tear, and we touch down at 12:55. I will leave a link to the live stream in the video description, as well as some other really cool sites, such as this video game-like demo where you can interactively experience the 7 minutes of tear in preparation for the landing. We covered the where and the why we're going, we covered the how with the rover, and the what with the landing details. Now, it's time for the who, the human side to sending robot explorers to other planets. What makes NASA and JPL really great aren't its robots, it's the people who build them. And while it's not really possible for me to capture what it's gonna feel like for them to see it land this Thursday, the best I can do is to show you what it felt like for me 8 years ago when I was in a very similar situation. I made a video when Curiosity landed, but at the time my channel had less than 100,000 subscribers, so I know that most of you haven't seen this footage, but even if you have, with the landing less than a week away, it's a great time for a second watch to get you pumped up. And for context here, you should know that during my time I was working on the rover, I had a son and lost my mom to ALS. And while my contribution was small relative to the overall picture, I tried to capture the human element here of what it feels like to basically have 7 years of your life and career vindicated with that beautiful phrase, touchdown confirmed, we are safe on Mars. So with that, consider this my tribute to everyone out there working to push the limits of human understanding, with a little bit of help from adorable little young Mark Group.
Let's start, if we may, with your complicated life, with your genetics research, as well as everything else. How much time do you manage to spend on genetics with all this Bitcoin activity going on?
Well, probably still my 40 hours a week, but that wouldn't mean that the majority would not still go into my Bitcoin ambitions, which then ultimately means there's lots of work every week to be completed. It's certainly a challenging time.
It reminds me a little bit of when Bill Gates, Larry Page of Google, and Sergey Brin of Google, they were also all pursuing higher education studies when they started their businesses. And they all sort of said they were carrying on with the PhD or whatever to keep their parents happy, and the parents would be unhappy if they dropped out of doing the studies. Does that ring any bells with you?
I think what was unique about them was that they were early in their PhDs. Same with Elon Musk, by the way. He went to Stanford. If you're early in the PhD and you didn't invest much yet, then you might think, I can just focus on my company and just do it again in 3-4 years if it doesn't work out. If you're almost at the end of it, then you just complete it. And I'm very happy